Whether it be police brutality or torturous jail work, Andor hasn't shied away from the harsh reality of existing under an authoritarian system over the previous 8 episodes, and the opening sequence of episode 9 introduces brand new horrors to be feared. Bix, who has been detained by the Empire in Nakina 5 over suspicions of suspicious activity on Ferrix, was immediately thrust into her first interaction with Deidre Miro, which surely changed the course of Bix's life. Even though Cassian is not present, the people of Ferrix who formerly thought of him as a friend are still affected by his deeds. Deidre interrogates Bix about him, the fractal radio unit and the buyer, despite Bix's best efforts to avoid it. However, scare tactics force Deidre to acknowledge her role in signalling the buyer. Despite her determination, Bix understands that the ISB officer won't trust any explanation she gives Deidre, so why bother? Deidre almost appears to enjoy the idea that Dr. Ghost will get to interview Bix using his chaotic method, demonstrating that she is so much more than just a woman attempting to succeed in society dominated by men. She is someone who, as long as it gives her power, fully intends to take advantage of all the atrocities the ISB has on hand. Even more frightening and evil than Bo Gullet used by Saw Gerrera against Bodhi Rook in Rogue One is Dr. Ghost's manner of interviewing his subjects. The Dizon Frey was a sentient species that the Empire encountered during its colonization operations that were hostile to them. The Doctor says to Bix, local commanders were given freedom to use any measures required as a result of the hostilities, which led to the killing of the Dizonites, which the Empire publicised in order to persuade other sentient species to submit. The local commanders went insane listening to the dying Dizonites' piercing screams, which were mostly of these children. The Empire then decided to use these piercing screams as a form of torture. Bix's painful screams are beautifully and tragically cut off. A startling and unsettling shift from one kind of brutalization to another is created, as the audio is released directly into the buzzing hiss of the drills of Nakina 5. Weeks into his prison term, Cassian has begun to settle down in the Imperial Factory complex. There are noticeable changes in Cassian's demeanour with his fellow prisoners, though most days remain largely the same. The prisoners are still required to make literal cogs, which maintains the imagery connecting Andor to the larger philosophical idea about capitalism and the industrial prison complex. He exhibits genuine concern for Olaf, the eldest prisoner, perhaps as a continuation of the concern he previously gave his mother Mava, but more crucially, he's beginning to plot with those around him. More significantly, he and Beanock understand that the platforms the Imperial officials use to bring down fresh prisoners aren't actually able to cook them, and that they are the most vulnerable when they are bringing in fresh captives. Even while a complete jailbreak still appears improbable at the moment, it is obvious that the preparations are being made for a potential attempt as Cassian uses his brake to saw away at a pipe in the fresher. Bix is exhausted, sweaty and obviously in pain when Andor reunites the audience with her in Ferrix. She has been subjected to Dr. Ghost's torture. Deidre takes advantage of her vulnerability to learn what she needs to know about Cassian. Deidre tells the Ferrix commanding officer to treat Bix as a witness rather than a hostage after she finished with her, and grants her permission to hang Pack to serve as a reminder to the populace of who is in power. Deidre reports her conviction that Cassian Andor is the brains behind everything the Axis is doing, especially Aldhani, where she brings the material back to ISB headquarters. It is obvious that Cassian is the anti-hero and not the mastermind. Bix's questioning shows that he has literally fitted the description commanders had provided of the rebels who attacked the garrison on Aldhani when returned to Carrick's clean-shaven and wealthy in credits. Deidre also confessed that Andor's mother was too old and fragile for her to question. She had actually wanted to leave her so she could use her as bait to catch Cassian later on. Speaking on the matter on Andali, Mother Mothma makes a valiant effort to convince the Senate to oppose the Emperor's Public Order Resentencing Directive by describing it as a heinous violation of the rights of the people they are elected to represent. However, her fervent appeals are met with indifference as her fellow senators choose to turn their lights off and disregard the Empire's continued overreach. It's a scene that feels all too familiar with contemporary politics, where senators and political figures frequently disregard their voters' best interest in favour of preserving their own livelihoods. Mon receives surprising news that a relative has arrived at her home after a heartbreaking setback. She goes back to her house, and her daughter, Lyda, is gushing about the lovely dress that Val, Mon's loving cousin, gave her. The relationship between Mon and Val isn't as shocking as it might seem, even if early Andor promos hinted that they would talk at some point in the series. Val did have a Chandrillan touch to her, after all. Cintra teased her for being a rich girl running away from her home. Mon and Val deliberately avoid discussing the participation in the uprising by obscuring their conversation with references to vows made, travel schedules, and Val's impending return to their homeworld. When Mon advises to Val to travel and let the world remember her for her ostensibly wealthy persona, the remark about her being a pampered little rich girl is brought up once more. When Val sits down to eat with Mon and Perrin, Perrin can't help but make a snide remark about how Val needs to find herself a husband, which be problematic given her relationship with Cinta. Val discusses her plans to return home to Chandrilla. Following Val's departure, Mon and Tay have another fortuitous event regarding their foundation, which has caused them a little bit of trouble. It doesn't appear that they will be able to transfer money through it without arousing suspicions, despite their best attempts. Tay makes a recommendation, but Mon is reluctant to engage in Chandrillan banker David Scundrel since she refers to him as a thug rather than a banker. Unfortunately, it appears that moral compromises will be necessary if they are to avoid the aid of the uprising. Things are getting stressful for the captives back on Akina 5 as reports about something occurring on Level 2 start to spread. While Cassian and other convicts are waiting to start another shift, tensions start to rise on the Skybridge. Melchi makes the menacing remark that the Empire could keep them in prison indefinitely and no one would know, as Targa tries to communicate with prisoners on another Skybridge in the distance. This sets off Kino, because his promotion to acting as foreman of the unit 5-Do-T in the last week's episode, which gave fans the impression that Kino is somewhat of an antagonist. This little scene humanizes the character. The prospect of his liberation is all Kino has left to hold onto. Therefore, the reports of disturbance on Level 2 make him anxious, because they pose a threat to that. And even though he vehemently insists that nothing is happening, danger is developing inside the factory. At some point, Cassian confronts Kino and asks whether he would prepare to assist in planning an escape, but Kino is only concerned with the 217 shifts that remain. Kino isn't prepared to bend, and he won't tell how many guards are on duty, despite Cassian's best efforts to convince him that the Empire doesn't care about them and treats them as little more than droids on each tier. Again, Andor depicts Cyril Khan having breakfast with his mother Edie at home. These remarkable incidents have come to define the character and serve to emphasise how alone he has grown since returning home. Similar to other episodes, this conversation is rife with mother-son conflict, with Cyril protesting that his mother left him out for him despite his orders not to, and Edie retorting that she gives him everything but receives nothing in return. When he mentions that he's been promoted at work, her criticism abruptly stops, and she begins to praise him instead of label him a tenant and describing him as someone his uncle would be glad of. She is unaware though that this promotion was intended to keep him from speaking out about the entire Cassian Andor scenario, and that it just made him a little crazy. After Cyril was removed from the conversation, Deidre started figuring out her daily commute so they could meet in secret to talk about the situation. Cyril leans heavily into fanaticism, saying that it's just been in your presence I realised life was worth living, which leaves Deidre to accuse him of stalking, which he is doing. The conversation spirals out of control at this point. Deidre pushes back, calling him crazy and stating that if he pursues any longer, that she would have him jailed. Cyril is distraught because, yet again, nobody realises his resolve to act morally. Where there is little doubt he is actively attempting to aid the bad guys, in his head he is attempting to find the murderer. But nobody seems to be concerned about the murderer who killed 2 of his co-workers. Deidre arrives in the ISB headquarters after escaping her stalker and finds out that one of Keegra's men has been arrested nearby Stigard. It is revealed that Dr. Ghost was able to convince the pilot into telling him that the rebels had plans focused on Spellhorse using the same strategies used in Bix. They want to orchestrate the pilot's death so that it appears to be a sad accident, since they are worried Krieger could become alarmed. There are new rumours circulating on the Kina 5 that entire Level 2 was fried alive for what Zinska refers to as creating trouble. Kino's concern that something might generally be wrong eventually comes to a head, and he lashes out on Melchi because she always sees the worst in everything. But when Olaf passes away from the slow-acting disease that he'd been weighing on him throughout the whole episode, tensions reach a fever pitch. When protecting him from the officers watching them doing his best to help, Cassian does eventually lose his balance and control of his body. Melchi and Cassian try to carry him back. He tries to walk to the cell block but doesn't get very far, so Kino calls for a doctor. While they wait for Dr. Rasiv to arrive, Kino sends Melchi away out of concern that he might cause a scene. Instead, he stays with Cassian. Olaf sadly has suffered a severe stroke, and Rusav continues immediately that he won't live, so he ends his suffering. The doctor adds that Olaf is actually lucky because in a week they will all wish they were him, as he gives a lethal dose of medication. When asked about what actually transpired on Level 2, Kino learns that Rusav, that someone who had already been discharged from the facility, was intentionally brought back into the same floor he had been working on. The Imperial officers fried the entire floor to hide the error out of fear. The 9th episode of Andor concludes with Kino telling Cassian that there have never been more than 12 guards on the floor at any given time, as they realise they would never leave the Kina 5, in light of the fact that the following orders won't get him out of prison in any other way. Kino is now prepared to stage their escape. Episode 9 continues the non-stop, tense-building storytelling from last week, while adding new, undetectable turns that keep viewers on the edge of their seats, continuing to show off what Star Wars is capable of, fusing the suspense of top spy thrillers with insightful comments about the actual world amid a well-known surroundings of a galaxy far, far away. There is little doubt that Andor will produce some of the strongest storytelling to come of the franchise since Rogue One, as they enter the last 3 episodes of Season 1. This dangerous time is set up to both inspire and destroy. This episode was better than last week. I liked Kino's transition from just wanting to get through his sentence and against trying to escape to realising that there is no hope that way, so he gets on board with Cassian's plan. Cyril is interesting to watch. Now that we've seen things go his way, he still seems to be deteriorating mentally and is still obsessed with Cassian, to the point of acting more erratic and stalking Deidre. I like a good planned prison escape, so hoping next week we see that unfold. Like and subscribe. Until the next time on Star Wars InVader.